Good day and welcome, America. Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports, The Interview. Very special guest. Very excited about this. We're just around the corner from election night 2012, and we have the vice presidential running mate to the third largest party and the third most organized party, or some would say maybe not as organized because they believe in personal liberty and freedoms. And we're talking about the Libertarian Party. And we're talking about Judge Jim Gray, and he's running as the vice presidential running mate to Governor Gary Johnson. Judge, thanks so much for joining us on Tom Donahue Reports, The Interview.
Well, thanks, Tom. I've been looking forward to it. It's always good to talk with good people.
Well, I thank you for that. And many times people use the term honorable for judge. I rarely do, but I think in this instance I'll make an exception.
Well, I'll try to earn it. How's that?
Okay. Let's start right out with you were actually nominated by fellow libertarians. You weren't selected, for instance, like Biden or Ryan.
Well, it's kind of half and half, Tom. At the convention for the Libertarian Party, they first nominate a presidential candidate, and then they nominated Gary Johnson, and he recommended that they nominate me. I then gave a nomination speech campaign, so did others, and then they voted at the convention, and I was fortunate enough and gratified to be nominated there at the convention. So it's kind of both, I guess.
I appreciate the explanation. And I think that is such an exciting way and a more, we were using the term honorable before, but I think a more honest way of having the people's input for, the vice presidential running mate. As you know, back in the early colonial history, the runner-up in presidential elections became the vice president, whether it was a Democrat, Republican, a Whig, or whatever. And so I think that's a great thing. Do you think that would make a difference today if even the major parties, the two organized and controlled and corporate parties, were to do that?
Well, I kind of wonder how it would work if we had President Obama and Vice President Ryan. Somehow I don't think it would get along very well, or the reverse either. So I think it's better to run as a team all the way around.
Well, I threw you a complicated question there because I guess the part I was really looking at, although that's a good point, Judge, is that what if rather than Obama or Romney selecting their vice presidential running mate, that at their convention, they at least maybe the Ron Paul people could have gotten involved with that, or Gary Johnson's people could have gotten involved with that. Do you see some changes coming maybe in that direction?
Well, that certainly could happen, but if it would ever happen, it'd probably be with us because we're libertarians and we believe in competition, but we also do have not really a tradition, but certainly an emphasis on supporting the presidential's wish. So one way or the other, I don't know. I believe in competition, but again, it could be kind of disastrous in some ways. Like I mentioned, President Romney and Joe Biden would be not a good fit.
Mm-hmm. Now, what I think is interesting here is the Libertarian Party nominated Gary Johnson. He originally was running as a Republican. He got kind of shunned by the party and was excluded from beyond just the initial debates. And so he decided to take his message and his campaign in a more independent direction, which many asked, or at least try to plead with Ron Paul to do the same. If Gary Johnson hadn't done that, would you be the running mate? Would you have thrown your hat in, and or do you think you would have been someone that would we be having this conversation tonight?
No, we would not. The short answer is certainly not. I'm a libertarian. I believe that Governor Gary Johnson will be a libertarian for the rest of his life. I know I would be, but I never would have been nominated probably by the Republican Party because I'm not a Republican.
But how about the Libertarians? If Gary Johnson wasn't the nominee, would you have been involved in this vice presidential bid?
Again, the answer is no. I was calling Governor Gary Johnson the most qualified person to be president of the United States that I know of while he was running. I guess maybe I said it a few too many times because he asked me to be his running mate. But otherwise, I can't think of anyone in the world that I would be doing this with other than Governor Gary Johnson.
And why do you feel that he's the most qualified person to run for this highest office of the land?
Actually, I think he's probably the most qualified person in my lifetime that I can think of. Not only because of what he says and what he understands and what he says he would do, but because he actually did it while he was governor of New Mexico. You know, this fellow has the background. After college, he started his own handyman company out of his own garage. He was the handyman, turned it into the largest construction company in New Mexico, actually had about 1,000 employees, made payroll, produced value, that sort of thing. And then as governor, he actually was responsible. He actually vetoed probably more excessive spending measures than all other governors combined, left the state with $1 billion surplus. And as he tells it, you know, everybody was predicting when he vetoed all of those measures that there was going to be rioting in the streets, that children were going to be starving, obviously none of which happened because there's so much pork in government, so much politics. So he stood up to it. And then in 1999, he actually held a press conference and said, as the sitting governor, I have conducted my audit. I've seen the war on drugs is not working. We've got to change it, and actually implemented big changes in New Mexico. He did not have any political constituency to do that. No political benefit. Took a lot of political heat. But he did it because it was the right thing to do. He shows courage. Isn't this the type of person that you would want to lead our country, particularly in times like these? I'm convinced the answer is yes.
Isn't that in your wheelhouse, too? I mean, you've spent a lot of time as a judge working on reform or maybe even radical change to the war on drugs and drug policy, especially at the federal level, and I guess the state as well.
Well, the answer to that question certainly is yes as well. I'm a former drug warrior. I was a former federal prosecutor, Navy JAG attorney, like you said, and the rest. But in my own courtroom, I saw we're churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose, filling our prisons with people that in many ways should not be there. And we could arrest and even convict big-time drug dealers. Does that mean now that heroin or marijuana is no longer available in that city? No, it's just an employment opportunity for someone else. So I held my own press conference back in 1992 saying that our nation's war on drugs was not working. And then when Governor Johnson did it in 1999, I saw it in the papers, and quickly he had a drug policy forum in Albuquerque. I was invited to go. I met him there. I've been following ever since. And actually, when I wrote my book in 2001 called Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed, I actually asked him to endorse it, which he did as the sitting governor. Plus, by the way, George Shultz from the Secretary of State, Ronald Reagan, endorsed it, along with Milton Friedman, one of my heroes, and Walter Cronkite. So, you know, you can get those four people together on anything, you're doing pretty well. So I've been admiring Governor Johnson since.
It's pretty amazing how many people from the so-called considered left and right have joined together and said this is nonsensical. It's ridiculous. It's non-productive to be waging a war on drugs as it pertains to, like you said, the low level, the user, the recreational. The tide seems to be turning, and I think there is some momentum, and I think you're going to pick up a lot of votes because of that.
There is definitely tide turning. In Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, as you know, there are initiatives on the ballot to treat marijuana like alcohol. We have endorsed them. Obviously, Romney and Obama are so much the same on so many issues. And, of course, again, they're opposing that. So they are the same. We are on the other side. But it's really more than that, Tom. You know, you cannot effectively declare war on an idea. There's no such thing as a war on drugs. That's just a thing. There's no a war on an idea like the war on terrorism, the war on poverty. You know, it's just an excuse for government involvement. And I have come to tell, and I stand by this, that the war on drugs, drug prohibition, is the biggest failed policy in the history of our country, second only to slavery. And I would challenge you or anyone listening here to give me any area of society you want to. You choose, and I will show you how it's made worse because of our policy of drug prohibition. It's that bad.
Well, I'm enjoying our discussion from a philosophical and ideological standpoint. But beyond that, in terms of practicality in this election, you always hear the argument that you're throwing away your vote, that you're squandering an opportunity, or maybe you're even going to tilt the election in a certain direction, like a Naderism, if you will, or the Nader effect. How do you respond to those folks that are going to say, well, I'll just vote the lesser of the evils?
You know something, Tom? Let me count the ways, because if you think about it, and that's all we're asking people to do, you just mentioned one, If you vote for the lesser of two evils, you still get evil. And I really deeply believe that a wasted vote is voting for somebody you don't believe in. So vote for someone, register that complaint. Also, by the way, if you're a Democrat and Obama is not meeting your needs, he's failing you with regard to this hope and change stuff, a vote by you for Obama is a wasted vote because you're telling the Democratic Party, hey, this candidate's okay with me, so get some more like him. But if they lose their own members' votes, that means they'll start looking at why, because politicians are great at followership, and they'll say, oh, you voted for Johnson instead? Well, you don't like our military to be involved in all of these wars. You don't like the Patriot Act, which is a direct assault on our civil liberties. You don't want drones flying overhead and surveilling us. Same thing if you're a Republican and Romney does not represent you. A vote for Romney is a wasted vote. Vote for Governor Johnson instead, assuming that you believe in him, which I certainly do. Oh, you really don't want the government to be in your bedroom. You don't want this excessive obese government that we have today. Oh, you really would like to balance our budget, realizing that the biggest security threat to our country is a failed economy, which is exactly where we're going because of all of this debt, et cetera, et cetera. So the final thing is, and this is hugely important as well, that we are, as libertarians, in the mainstream of American political thought. We're both financially responsible and socially tolerant. We all know that no one is going to accuse Obama of being financially responsible, and no one equally is going to accuse Romney of being socially tolerant. So we are in that mainstream. If we just get 5% of the vote in this election, we will then qualify for matching funds from the federal government. We'll be seen then as being viable going into 2016. It will be the beginning of the end of the two-party system, and will force the radical extremes on both Republicans and Democrats to come more toward the middle, which is where we are. Probably the most important vote a person could render at this point is voting for Governor Gary Johnson on those terms.
Well, one point about Romney is it depends on which Romney you're talking about.
Oh, here. You know,
which mirror on the wall. Okay, beyond the Romney reversal and all the different roles he plays and positions he's taken, you have a lot of folks that are saying, well, what about Ron Paul and Ron Paul's people? You know, they were shunned and they were disrespected at the convention, and I haven't seen even Rand Paul for that matter, but I haven't seen the Republicans in any way, form, or fashion reach out to those disaffected Ron Paul followers and part of the liberty movement. So my sense is, and maybe you could tell me more because you're on the campaign trail and you're lobbying or you're trying to at least recruit those votes. Are you finding that many of those Ron Paul followers and supporters are coming your way?
Oh, good heavens, yes. On the campaign trail, we have some avid supporters. In fact, I was just in New Orleans where the person in charge of our campaign used to be an avid Ron Paul supporter. We're all in the same family. And they've seen, in fact, it was so blatant at the Republican National Convention, they literally changed the rules right in front of your very eyes just to exclude Ron Paul. So I don't believe, and I know that most Ron Paul supporters do not believe you can change the Republican Party from within. But we're all in the same family. So many have come over to us. But I got to tell you, Tom, you know, there's so many people from the Move On movement, the Occupy movements that agree with us as well. You know, they don't want our military in these conflicts. They don't like us having this crony capitalism and paying people not to grow corn or to drill for oil. That's all of our views as well. We apply to the Democrats, you know, with regard to trying to keep more freedom for ourselves and the National Defense Authorization Act and the rest of that. So we really are in the political mainstream. We appeal to pretty much all segments as long as they're big issues. We'll never agree on all the small ones, and we understand that. But the big issues, our national security, our economy, our freedoms, people will agree with us. We're libertarians. We're in the mainstream.
And you know what was exciting? I worked for the Ron Paul campaign in 1988 when he was the Libertarian candidate for president. And even though 75% or more of the Libertarians, at least that's an approximation, are pro-choice as opposed to pro-life, and they still said, you know what, Ron Paul, on most of the big issues we agreed with, and we wanted this honorable man to run as our nominee. And that showed, I thought, a lot of courage on the part of the Libertarians back then, and I had a lot of respect for the fact that they were tolerant that Ron Paul was adamantly and vehemently pro-life.
Well, we knew where Ron Paul stood, and he was standing for liberty for our country and for financial responsibility. And you'll know where Governor Gary Johnson stands. I mean, you can go to the issue of gay marriage, and if Obama really believed in that, he would have done something at the beginning of his administration instead of right at the end to try to get pander to votes and try to get money. We stand, he now says, of course, it's a state right, which translates into he doesn't have to do anything. We say that marriage equality is literally the next step in the progression after racial equality and gender equality. Now it's marriage equality, and it's a 14th Amendment issue. So, again, Tom, you can agree with us or disagree with us, but at least you know where we stand. We're honest. That's why I'm so supportive of Governor Gary Johnson. And that's not the biggest thing in the nation's world. So that's not one of the big things that we're talking about, but at least you know where we stand, and I think people appreciate honesty.
Well, we have the aftermath of Sandy. We have FEMA that's coming in and in conjunction with other federal agencies and the federal government at large trying to take control here. How does the libertarian position, or I know that if you go back to the writings of Daniel Boone, he basically felt, I think he was either a congressman or a senator back then. He just said we cannot give money from the federal coffers or from the Treasury for those kinds of things because it can be used for bribery or favoritism or cronyism. How do you feel about the federal government's role in a natural disaster or catastrophe?
Well, thank you, Tom. And these are hard issues. And I don't pretend to speak for the Libertarian Party any more than anyone can speak for the Democratic or Republican Party. But I can tell you, again, it's not straight cut. Let me take by analogy, and then I'll come back to yours, that I'm here now in Indiana, and I've been driving through Illinois, Iowa, and you've seen the drought there, which is severe. And depending on where you are, they've lost like 30 to 50% of your corn crop. However, Obama's response to that is, we'll just reopen the applications for crop insurance. Well, the answer to that is no. Yes, this is a disaster, but it's insurable. It's foreseeable, and those people, if they wanted to be risk averse, could have bought crop insurance. But to now let them do it, that's not insurance. That's just a gift of public money. The answer is no. But on things that are not foreseeable, such as, Sandy, that is a non-foreseeable in a lot of ways tragedy, then at that point I think the federal government should come in. And you can go back to Katrina if you want to, which is also a similar event, plus compounded because really the Army Corps of Engineers really blew it by not maintaining the dikes, etc. So I think to that degree the federal government had a responsibility and they should come forward. Or you can go to others, like the tsunami off Japan, which had it happened here, or even there. We don't favor foreign aid, but my goodness sakes, if you have a tragedy like that in Japan and we can help, we will, because that's who we are. So it kind of depends the circumstances, but I feel personally, and just speaking for myself, that if it's a natural disaster that cannot be planned for, that's not necessarily a forest fire because you can get fire insurance, but something like Sandy, that is a natural catastrophe that the government should rally and help its people.
I'm presuming, although maybe I shouldn't, and let me just ask you straight up, the gold standard, lawful constitutional money, gold, silver, etc. Where would the Libertarian Party stand, or where would you and Governor Johnson stand on maybe reestablishing the gold standard, or how to deal with the Federal Reserve System, similar to Ron Paul's initiatives? Just curious to see how much time you guys spend on that.
Well, certainly. That is what we know in my profession is a compound question, but I'll try to answer it. First of all, with regard to the gold standard, it's a tragedy that Richard Nixon ever took it off of there. When I was in college, which is in the early middle 60s, I could buy 4 gallons of gasoline for $1. And you know something, Tom, today I still can, as long as I use a silver dollar. So it isn't the gas that's increased, it's our inflation. Had Nixon not taken us off the gold standard, we'd be forced to be financially responsible and we wouldn't be in this mess. Having said that, I'm probably persuaded there is not enough gold in the world now to put us back on the gold standard, so that's just not an option. But as far as the Fed is concerned, again, you're talking about people and their confidence in our monetary system. And if we were just to strike the Fed immediately, I think that would undercut that confidence. Governor Johnson says, and it's fine and it draws applause, that if he would be given a bill to get rid of the Fed, he'd sign it. But to some degree, that's not going to happen because the Congress isn't going to do it. What we will do is put people in the Fed that will reduce its involvement, because the Fed is a private group that exerts enormous power over our monetary system and hence us. So we'll restrict it over time. They see themselves as having two mandates. One is to protect our currency with regard to inflation and deflation. That's okay. It'll be restricted but continue on for a while. But as far as the second mandate to control our employment, the answer is no. They can't do it. It's inappropriate. It's ineffective. And we'll take that away as quickly as we can.
Rather than getting into the specifics of it, I would say, generally speaking, the overarching position that you and the governor would hold would be to, at minimum, audit the Fed, and if there were a bill and the Fed could be ended successfully, you do favor that.
Categorically, yes. I can also say that thanks to Ron Paul and others, we actually did have at least a partial audit of the Fed. And Tom, did you share my shock when we see that we have literally spent, unbeknownst to us, trillions of our dollars fortifying foreign banks, ostensibly to keep the whole foreign...
Not just banks, media companies, but you're right. There was the foreign influence in terms of the subsidies, the bailouts, the low interest or no interest loans. Incredible. I think it's somewhere in the area of $15 trillion.
You know, I don't get shocked anymore by a lot of things the government did, but I was shocked by that one. Plus, you know, it's a rigged game today with the Fed because they are loaning money to our big banks at 0% interest. 0% interest, some loan. And then those banks take that money and reverse it by buying government bonds. So literally, our government is paying these banks money which they invest, which is the government's money. You know, I mean, that's not a bad deal. I'd love to do that myself.
You know, I did a report just recently, and I've also interviewed G. Edward Griffin on the Fed, and I worked with Eustace Mullins years ago. But back to the campaign trail here, there were reports, and these are founded reports, that Gary Johnson and yourself have had such an impact in some of the swing states that Romney and the GOP spent time trying to knock you guys off the ballot, challenge, your ballot status in certain states. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, Tom. They have gone literally around the country and have filed something in the order of 15 different lawsuits in 15 different states to get us off the ballot. And we've had to take a lot of our resources and attorney's fees to defend them. Some of them were downright silly, but we've defended all of them successfully in 13 states. In 2 states, they were successful, kind of very unusual fact patterns. One was in Oklahoma, the other is in Michigan. We will probably not be on the ballots in either of those 2 states, so the Republicans were successful. We will be on the ballots in 48 states plus the District of Columbia. You know, we're playing hardball. We understand. The Republicans are scared, although I honestly, deeply feel we'll take more votes away from Mr. Obama than we do Mr. Romney. But one way or the other, what you said is correct.
And my understanding was there was a filing deadline, and some of the petitions got in a few minutes later than the top of the hour, and they used that as a wedge or as some kind of mechanism to work towards the disqualification of your ballot, for you guys to be listed officially on the ballot.
The way I understand it, now you're talking about Michigan, and that's correct. Actually, the governor never requested to be on the ballot when he was running as a Republican in Michigan. People put him on it, and then they say he didn't withdraw it quickly enough, and they have what they call a sore loser rule, so you can't be on one and then the other. It was kind of a technical issue. I think we got the short end of the stick, but I really don't have any first-hand information about it. But certainly the Republicans tried to pounce on it, and in that one at least they were successful.
What states do you think are going to have the biggest impact?
Well, I think that we'll have a big impact in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, where they have these initiatives on the ballot to treat marijuana like alcohol. We, again, support them. Romney and Obama do not. Once again, I call them Robomney because they're so much the same. We're obviously well known in New Mexico because that's where the governor was so successful. I think New Hampshire could work quite well. We're polling quite well in Ohio, which is a swing state. Although when it comes down to it, even though people want to vote for us, maybe they might think that they're so adamant against one or the other one that that may change. I'm here in Indiana right now. I think we're doing pretty well in Indiana. But I can't say I'm a political wizard. My crystal ball is...
Okay, that gives us a pretty good idea. Now, you have you're the presidential candidate for your party, Libertarians. Governor Johnson will be appearing in a second independent debate. And I think that's pretty exciting. I guess it's going to be right on the eve, or actually just prior to voting that following day. I think it's Monday, right?
Yes, it is, and we're pleased about that. You know, I was in Indiana again today, and I had one man from the media come up and kind of apologize. He was with one of the major news services and say, you know, the media has just really been a despicable thing that they have not covered you, and he was kind of apologizing for it. But we'll be on this one. We should have been in the presidential debates. That is completely controlled by the Presidential Debates Commission, so-called, completely locked up by Republicans and Democrats. We actually have an antitrust action pending in Los Angeles that we will pursue, but it'll have to be after the election. But you know, too, Tom, that it's so controlled by the Republicans and Democrats that the League of Women Voters that used to be out in front on this publicly withdrew their names, saying they would not be a part of the, quote, hoodwinking of America, unquote. We're going to pursue that and show the world what's going on here, really.
And the third-party debates, they're sponsored by, or at least they've been brought to the public's, at least through the Internet and streaming and digital media. I think the organization is Free and Equal Elections Foundation.
That's my understanding. And, you know, it's a revolution that you are involved with to get into the social media. It's certainly having a big effect and will have increasingly so. But still, of course, the televised debates have quite an impact as well.
So, you have Jill Stein for the Green Party, Virgil Good for the Constitution Party, Rocky Anderson for the Justice Party, and of course, you guys would be, I think, would have the most name recognition because the Libertarian Party, in my understanding, was founded in 1972. It goes back quite a while.
Yes, 1971, but yes, and I think we do go back farther than any other. We are, as you say, the third largest party in the country. But I have respect for all of those people you mentioned, and we're very similar with them on many ways. Actually, I ran for U.S. Senate and from California as a Libertarian. The Green Party didn't have anyone running, and in Orange County, where I'm from, the Green Party endorsed me. That we're very similar on lots of issues, as long as you stay with their financial approach. But social issues, we're very much together, just like we are with so many other people.
I think really this is free expression. This is freedom to express those ideas, your philosophy, your ideology, your politics, and I think that it's good to see not quite unity, but at least saying, hey, you know, we want to support the fact that you guys are an underdog as well, and you're part of this alternative third party movement. And it's very exciting. And, of course, if you ever get to the point where you guys are legislating, then you can discuss your differences, which I think is great. Two of the ideas I've expressed on my radio program for years is, one, my first goal, if I could be the emperor, I would eliminate political parties completely, and that you'd have to run as individuals, and you would learn to network with others and collaborate, just like we operate in society. Secondarily, if that was not successful, I would certainly like to see a multi-party system, and I think that's probably more likely based on the fact that we're heading in that direction.
Well, that was what I was thinking while you were asking the first part of your question. Yes, but I don't think it'll ever happen. But we have an ace in the hole, Tom, that if people only knew that it was viable, they would not only vote for us, they'd demand it. And that is, we would put in a coalition government, which is kind of what you're talking about. Yes, in our administration, we'll have Libertarians and Independents, but also Republicans and Democrats, assuming they agree with our approach of financial responsibility and social tolerance. And then when we have all of this bipolar politics, this selfish politics going on in Washington today, we'll be able to have Republicans or Democrats in our administration saying, go out, talk to your colleagues, get on board. This is a good idea. We'll give credit to anybody that has a good idea, anybody that supports a good idea. We'll start working together for America instead of all this selfishness. So this is something we bring to the table that the people will absolutely demand once they see that it's viable, because they're fed up, and logically so, with what's going on today.
Judge, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I'm going to at least throw out the question. Did you or perhaps the governor lobby or at least have a conversation or attempt to have a conversation with Ron Paul to see if there was a possibility that he would endorse the governor and you for president and vice president?
Well, I myself did not and was not privy to it. There have been conversations, certainly. And you know something, we're just kind of a strange situation. When Governor Johnson withdrew 4 years ago from the race, he certainly endorsed Ron Paul. We would welcome Ron Paul's endorsement, but he has his son. You know, it's a family thing. Rand Paul from Kentucky, and I know that he wants to hand off the baton to his son, and it's really kind of hard to argue with that. But we've gotten an awful lot of his supporters. We will continue to, and whichever way they wish to go is understandable.
Well, thankfully there are options because I think if Ron had been a decade or two younger, he probably would have run, just like the governor, and probably would have dropped out of the Republican, even though he was in the debates. But I think that, you know, you're 76, 77 years of age, and you're retiring from Congress. He's given it his all, and you just can't expect someone to have to go through that, to endure as you guys have as further rounds. And I think that's the reason. Plus, you said his son's waiting in the wings. To wrap up here, I see both parties, Democrat and Republicans, as really one party with two names, or you could say the serpent with two heads that need to be severed. Would you say that's a pretty good analogy?
Yes, sir. I cannot say it any better. They really, again, Romney and Obama are just so much the same on so many. You know, you talk about Obamacare. Romney's the architect of Obamacare. You know, as far as putting our military in all of these conflicts around the world, as far as increasing borrowing and spending our money, I call them Robomney. They're so much the same.
That's
the Republicans and Democrats are the same as well. We give that different choice. It's either them on the one hand or us on this one. And I'm comfortable and satisfied that the American people will actually vote for us if we can end up running in 2016. It's just a question of time. The sooner the better.
And they're both not only controlled parties, but they're corporate parties. And I see the Democrats more as the red communist, if you will, but still controlled by the corporations. And then you have on the Republican side I would call them the corporate socialist. And so really, if you're looking for freedom or liberty and quite frankly justice in all of this, you're not going to find it on either slate.
Tom, I was a federal prosecutor. I'll put it this way. I ended up heading a unit prosecuting frauds against the government. I prosecuted a lot of bank vice presidents. Doesn't happen very often, but Governor Johnson and I believe in responsibility at all levels of society. In the higher position of trust, the higher scrutiny there should be. Now, if you look at what's happened in the past bank scandals and the housing scandals and stuff, you have big-time people who are involved with banks at high levels giving huge donations, both to Obama and Romney. Now, look, after the election, they're going to expect payback. Do you really think there's going to be a fair investigation of possible criminal activity and all of this stuff? Not with them, but with us. If there's something there, we will investigate it. I'm not saying I have information that there's any criminal activity, but we will investigate it because we believe in responsibility. We will represent the people, and they have received all of these contributions. You know full well that there's strings attached and hooks in them.
Are you encouraged with our republic and the participation by our citizenry in terms of our constitutional responsibilities, as well as civic involvement going beyond the two controlled parties?
Tom, I am innate optimistic. I love my country. However, I fear for us in two substantial ways. One of them is an economic with our economy, where, the biggest security threat to our country is a bad economy. The second is what makes us great, what makes us special, our soul, which is our freedoms and our liberties. And our soul today is under attack by our very own government, Romney and Obama, Republicans and Democrats, as a symbol. You go to National Airport today. This was called to my attention about a week ago. Go to National Airport, Reagan Airport in Washington. Today you see this big American flag coming down from the main airport chamber. And on top of that big American flag is a surveillance camera. That is a symbol of where we are today. We are a police state. Our government intentionally is keeping us in fear so they can continue to intrude upon our civil liberties and our freedom, our very soul. And it's Governor Gary Johnson and I that stand in the way. Don't look to Romney or Obama to change that. It's scary.
But your final statement for those that are going to be voting, and even post-election, because we'll be posting these MP3s and YouTube so that people will hear your message that will live on. What would your final words be to the listeners and to the voters?
Well, and thank you for this opportunity. This is the most exciting thing that's happened to me since the birth of my children. It just kind of fell out of the sky. I did not see it coming. But my final word is to quote a hero of mine, a fellow by the name of Thomas Jefferson. Perhaps you've heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in France when we finally ratified the Constitution. And he sent a letter back saying, congratulations, this is a fantastic document, but in a fragile republic, a fragile democracy, you're going to have a revolution every generation. Why? Because the private interests will inveigle their way into power and will sap our vitality and sap our strength. And Tom, how many generations has it been since that was stated? But in all humbleness, but also excited and challenged, I'm here to tell you that I deeply believe that revolution is now here, and it takes the form of Governor Gary Johnson and Judge Jim Gray. We are what America will need, will crave, and when they see that we're viable and see what we will do and what Governor Johnson has done, they will demand it. It's just a question of time. Thanks for the opportunity of sharing this.
Absolutely. Judge Jim Gray has been my guest. And Jim, thank you so much for joining us on Tom Donahue Reports, the interview. Best of luck to you and to the governor. And we salute your service and just roll on.
Thank you. Good luck to us all. Appreciate the opportunity.